I remember the numbness, the absolute absence of thoughts. When I compose myself, the world rushes back in a hectic traffic-like way. Even though I was standing in a library, her small hands were fumbling a crack in an old wooden table, while she was humming with a barely audible radio. She had this shy, yet calm demeanor about her. Anyway, I noticed she was frowning over a big French textbook and made a semi-funny remark about petite girls and huge books. She didn't laugh. I sat down at her table nonetheless, clumsily dropping my economic books. She snorted and said something along the lines of her liking slapstick. We got to talking about my doctor's degree and the French course she was advised to take. Before we knew it, the library was closing. That's when she left in a hurry, but not before giving me a smile that I'll remember for the rest of my life. I spent every evening of the next week at the library until I finally bumped into her again. She was so charming and careless with that messy dark hair of hers. We finally bumped in a few more times at the library, and she would always have to leave in a hurry, but she never told me why, which made me even more intrigued. She was an ocean, and I wanted to dive. About 3 weeks of library talk later, I noticed she was conflicted, her eyes always shifting nervously. It didn't take me long to realize she was attracted to me, but something was holding her back. Another boy, perhaps? I never asked her. She never told. Yet, it didn't make me think about the romance between us was impossible. To my absolute delight, I was wrong. I picked her up after class and told her about my entire date night planned. She objected, saying I shouldn't have. But she was worth it. Absolutely worth it. Every penny I spent on gifts, every second I spent on planning those dates. Let's just say I was in love. So, when I finally got to take her virginity, I felt like the luckiest man alive. We made love at my parents' cabin in the woods. She was nervous, so I helped her relax with a glass of Merlot. She didn't like it, even though it was the most expensive bottle I could find. That didn't matter, though. All that mattered was she. Things didn't stay that way, though. After a year, Vanessa kind of changed. She grew aggravated, nervous, impatient. Sometimes she threw uncontrollable tantrums and I didn't know what to do. Where was the girl I loved? She was in there somewhere. I could feel her presence, but some days it was even hard to recognize her. Sometimes she would just scream at me to give her up. But how could I ever do that? I loved her. Though, sometimes I think I was just fooling myself. She had grown to be quite a handful, to be honest. I started falling out of love when she began to get fat. Her personality was gone, and so was her figure. But I never could quite give up on those months of pure bliss. I wanted to see her smile again, like that first day in the library. I tried to make her laugh, but it just wasn't the same. And now, I'll never see it again. What's this? David groaned. The big man slammed the paper over the table. I arched my eyebrow, and he let out a smoker's cough, and leant over the table with his hands folded. You want to try that again? I shrugged. He traced his mustache with his thumb and index finger down and tapped his chin and sighed. Sam, this is gonna fly, I nodded. I'm sorry, it's the best I could do. David shook his head, and took the paper and stood up and went out the door. He returned almost a half hour later. By the time he got back, my right leg was shaking so heavily in the car. My calf cramped up. So, what'd they say? David shook his head slowly. I sagged in the car. I can't rewrite that. It's what I feel. David let out a sigh through his nose, making it whistle a little bit. Then, and there's nothing I can do for you and no more, Sam. I heard some noise coming from the outside. David looked up at me with a worried expression. And I stood up, but he motioned for me to stay put. He opened the door and closed it behind him. The noises grew louder. People started shouting at each other, but I couldn't make out the words. Then the door slammed open. A Latin woman in her 30s came in, paced by the room twice before sitting down. What in the hell is this sob story? I looked at her and thought it was an apologetic stare, but she shook her head. Mr. Turner. She paused in what felt like forever. My legs started to shake again. She noticed and gave me an evil grin. Mr. Turner. She raised an eyebrow as if my name disgusted her. You do realize that you're in a lot of trouble. I didn't quite understand, and I let her know with a look. She leaned back in her chair and rubbed her hands. Okay, she smiled mockingly. Let's see. You wrote this piece of shit. She gestured at the piece of paper. I nodded hesitantly. And you think we won't find any evidence against you? I sagged once again. I figured it was best not to say anything. I had this conversation 5 times in the last half hour, and my face was still caked with tears. She got out a folder and placed pictures of Vanessa all over the table. Her glare forced me to look at them, and tears came up again. So much blood. I felt her eyes boring into me, and looked up. You raped her. You killed her. She spat. No, I didn't. I never. She was already dead, I pleaded. She kissed her teeth and looked right at her again. Mr. Turner, you agreed to write a confession, and we got this sick story instead. I grew angry again. Sick. Love is sick. She slammed her hands on the table. It definitely hurt, but I don't think she noticed. Your kind of love is sick. You carved her mouth open, goddammit. That was it. I flew at her, hands open, but cuffs restrained me from getting a hold of her. You see that, Mr. Turner? That's how you handle Vanessa. I sat down and contemplated the last 20 years of my life. Boring teenager years. Boring adulthood. She was all I had. I shook my head. I loved Vanessa. I could never hurt her, but she withered away. So I left, and now she's... The detective clenched her teeth so hard I could hear them crack. She didn't wither away, Mr. Turner. She was interrupted by the door opening. Detective Vasquez. Parents are here. She nodded and turned her back to me. Tell her parents I loved your daughter dearly. We led a full and happy life together, for as long as it lasted. The detective's face turned to ice. I could see the veins pulsing in her neck. She turned the table over and let it fall on my kneecaps. The blow stung so hard I teared up. Fool, I heard her shouting. You want me to say that to people who have to bury a 13-year-old?